One thing I essentially see in a lot of political communities, at least especially recently, all over the entirety of the internet, is entirely the question of the labor theory of value and the subjective theory of value. Like between the two on who is right on who is right when we actually when we actually go on to these economic
Okay, just let us know when you're able to finish a sentence. We'll be right here waiting.
kind of focused on when we're discussing this is the labor theory of value, mostly developed by Adam Smith and David Ricardo.
I can already tell this is gonna fail. Smith and Ricardo worked on a cost theory of value where they knew there were certain problems. Marx's labor theory of value considered labor as the only determinant of value and ignored all the problems that had been pointed out, especially by Ricardo.
And the subjective theory of value, developed by people of the Austrian School of Economics, such as Mises and Rothbard.
Actually, it was Karl Menger.
The reason here is because Karl Marx used the labor theory of value to essentially come into his conclusions that the worker class is basically exploited out of their own labor power for them selling their labor power to a capitalist that would soon basically sell their product to a market and have to pay for resources and all these things.
Yeah, he goes on like this for a while. We'll have to do a lot of skipping in this one.
So for entirely the United States or entire capitalists to make sure that people do not come to these conclusions, these radical conclusions, especially in the heights of the Cold War, or in the heights of what would soon be in the Cold War, they had to essentially develop another theory of value that would come up with this and try to explain a value in capitalism.
Oh boy. Subjective theory of value was developed in the 1870s by Karl Menger. It was also formulated independently around the same time by Leon Walras, the father of general equilibrium theory, and William Stanley Jevons, the first ecological economist. This was decades before the Soviet Union even existed, and even longer until the Cold War. I don't know how you think you've debunked anything when you can't even get the timeline correct.
These three individuals were a part. Well, actually, hold on. Yeah, I'm pretty sure these three individuals were entirely a part of kind of the Austrian School of Economics, or even sympathized with it.
No, they weren't. The Austrian School of Economics didn't even really exist. This was the event that got the ball rolling on it for Menger. Jevons was English and didn't become aware of Walras and Menger until after he published his theory in 1871. Walras wasn't Austrian either. He was French, and he wasn't aware of Jevons or Menger. So, not only did you screw up the timelines, as there was nothing even remotely resembling the Cold War or the Soviet Union at this time, you had to lie and make it sound like they were part of some kind of conspiracy or something when they weren't even aware of each other at the time. If multiple people come to the same conclusion independently, that speaks to there being a very high likelihood of it being correct. And that's why you had to lie like this, isn't it?
This is entirely theory that was essentially set up by objectivists.
Oh, for the love of Mike, objectivism wasn't founded by Ayn Rand until the 1940s at the earliest. This is 70 years before objectivism. Idiot.
The labor theory of value is a theory of value that argues that the economic value of a good, its service, is determined on the total amount of socially necessary labor required to produce it.
It's funny how it was Ricardo who set up this theory in his Principles of Political Economy and Taxation, and then later in that same chapter goes on to refute it. Let's say you've got a tomato plant. You put the tomato fruits into a soup. You make another soup with the leaves and the stems. Exact same labor, but people love the soup made with the fruit, but not with the stems. So they won't sell for the same price. You'll have to charge a much lower price for the stem soup if you can get them to buy it at all. Socially necessary labor was used by Marx to paper over this problem, which completely refutes the theory. Socially necessary labor is completely circular reasoning, because how do you know what labor is socially necessary? It's the labor that adds value, of course. Sorry, this is not allowed by the methods of rationality. The only way this could have any validity is if you can come up with an objective way ahead of time to tell which labor will be socially necessary or not. And you can't base it on utility to the consumer because that is subjective theory of value, which you claim to have debunked.
The labor theory of value usually is associated with Marxian economics, though it appears onto the theories earlier of classical liberal economists such as Adam Smith and David Ricardo.
No, it doesn't. They never put in this socially necessary crap. In fact, Ricardo pretty much said that's the one thing you can't do. Use the final value as an indicator of what kind of labor does and does not go into creating value. I quote, "The value of a commodity, or the quantity of any other commodity for which it will exchange, depends on the relative quantity of labor which is necessary for its production, and not on the greater or less compensation which is paid for that labor." If the value originates from the labor itself, there shouldn't be any extra factors you need to look at to determine if value is being added. This is the problem with labor theory of value that Ricardo discussed, that he had no solution for. In fact, he specifically wrote, "I am not satisfied with the explanation I have given of the principles which regulate value."
Smith saw the price of a commodity in terms of the labor of the purchaser must exploit to buy it.
I have no clue what this is supposed to mean. It's certainly not anything Smith said.
The labor theory of value is central onto the Marxist theory, which holds that the working classes exploit under capitalism disassociate price and value.
Let's take care of this crap right here and now, from Ricardo himself, and I quote, "Mr. Malthus appears to think that it is a part of my doctrine that the cost and value of a thing be the same. It is, if he means by cost, cost of production, including profit. It's only you morons who try to divorce it from price and come up with crap like exchange value and use value to try and differentiate it, when the whole idea of this is to try and figure out why goods are priced the way they are."
What we're gonna essentially get in here is that the subjective theory of value is essentially, if we're gonna put this into practice, you essentially own a business, and you have to essentially develop a great idea to produce or contribute upon to the market within the entirety of the business.
Let me save you the effort here. Subjective theory of value means that a good or service is valued by how much of a benefit the consumer feels he will get from the transaction. As long as he values the good or service more than he values the money to pay for it, he buys it. This isn't difficult.
The problem is that what we have to understand under this idea is that we have to essentially understand what we have to understand here on what would happen.
Oh, get on with it already.
People like Carl Migner, Leon Walras, and William Stanley Jevons would argue that this entire product and like these products are essentially developed, and the pricings of these entire
I can feel my brain cells dying off as I watch this.
Things and pricing the value of something is the very essence of the individual themselves, how they continue to add value.
Okay, he finally gets to the point, and it's utter nonsense. The very essence of value of the individual themselves, huh?
So to them, under capitalism, they can bargain the prices. But the thing is, we cannot see that today.
I don't even understand what it is you think we're supposed to see in the first place.
I guess to clear up an example as how we can see it today, you can go to a grocery store right now, and you can try and buy a can of mac and cheese, can of mac and cheese or whatever you like to eat, in your lunchtime. You can try and buy a can of mac and cheese, and it costs $6. Now, you can go to the cash register, and to these people,
15 seconds later,
just go to the cash register and say, "Oh, this is $6? Yeah, you see, I don't necessarily like this price. This price is way too expensive."
Okay, so what I think he's trying to say here is, you can't haggle. Well, what does that have to do with subjective theory of value?
Because it's entirely of the cash register, or the entirety of the capitalist. They set it onto that price.
No, the owner of the store sets the price. If you're talking to the owner, you can haggle if he's willing to do so. Why would you expect cashiers to have the authority to haggle?
And so because of that, they would essentially tell you to, okay, well, you have to pay for the price entirely. If you're not going to pay for the price.
Exactly! You're either going to agree to the price or you're not. You agree to the price. You, the purchaser, the consumer. If you think the benefit you'll get from the product is worth the money, you'll buy it. Otherwise, you won't. You just described subjective theory of value. Not very well, but still.
If you're not going to pay for the price entirely and you're going to take it anyways, then we're going to call the cops. Then we are going to call the cops.
Yeah, of course they're going to call the cops if you take it without paying. That's called stealing. What does that have to do with what factors figure into the price of it?
And this is entirely of like the problem here with the subjective theory of value. It's implying that we can essentially bargain our prices.
So he actually does think that subjective theory of value means haggling. If you don't have a clue about what something is, you can't be said to have debunked it. Really, I don't have to do anything else to refute this imbecile since I've made it clear this guy doesn't have the first idea what he's talking about, but let's continue anyway out of sheer morbid fascination.
The problem is that we have to essentially define like why is this essentially bargained, or this is essentially the price that it is today. The subjective theory of value would basically say a diamond is the price that it is of how high it is.
Why don't we enlighten this with another Ricardo quote? I cannot get over the difficulty of the wine, which is kept in the cellar 3 or 4 years, or that of the oak tree, which perhaps originally had not 2 shillings expended on it in the way of labor, and yet comes to be worth 100 pounds. Wine is more valuable than grape juice, even though no other labor is done other than just letting the bottle sit there a while. An oak tree is worth a lot more than a sapling, even though no one put any of their labor into actually growing it. Because it's not about the labor. It's about how useful it is in fulfilling people's desires.
Is because it serves the philosophical need, which is just simply, I would say, not exactly the case, because the thing is that we have to understand
oh, for Christ's sake, spit it out, man!
Why that would be the case. Let's look at the process of finding a diamond. Diamonds are one of the rarest items you can ever find entirely. They are one of the rarest items you can entirely find entirely within Africa, and even like into Western Asia and all these things. They are very rare to find.
Here's socialist links for you. Never using one word when 40 will do.
And if you are able to find it, it takes a long time for you to even cultivate it, or to even cultivate it, or like.
You don't cultivate diamonds.
This is not just because of the entirety of like, oh, how the individual feels on this, because if it was, then we would essentially be able to see that this diamond could essentially be taken, or be taken entirely, regardless of the price, whatever, and could be taken by the individual.
If anyone has a clue what this moron is trying to say, please comment.
Based on their hands, which simply not the case under capitalism. The individual doesn't have that power. The consumer doesn't have that power under capitalism. It is dependent onto the price of the capitalist, the bourgeoisie, how they put the price on it.
Ask me how I can tell you've never run a business before in your life.
This is very much the case under capitalism, when we have essentially commodities based on exchange value, and there's essentially a capital to be gained out of this. Capital, under this instance, being the accumulation of labor.
So, for those of you who can speak English, what he's saying is, actually, I have no clue what it is he's saying.
I'm not going to call capital as a tools of production. I don't know why entirely like economic classes call it that.
Yeah, it's pretty clear you didn't understand anything about your economics classes.
But because when you define like entirely of a GDP
and the tools of production are 2 entirely different things. Yeah, I know. I'm just watching the rest of the video to see the train wreck happen.
Moving on. A lot of things that the subjective theory of value essentially also fails to consider is on how the math on how wages are determined as well.
Have you ever seen a supply-demand graph?
A worker a worker does put in time and puts in entirely labor power and labor time within the workplace, and essentially would develop a product here.
The worker gets paid a wage because he believes the wage he's given is worth more than the time and effort he put into earning it, and his employer believes that the value the worker adds to the product is more than the value of the wage he's paying him. If even one of those aren't the case, the exchange wouldn't happen. It's a win-win, positive sum increase in wealth that benefits both sides. I don't really expect you to have an answer for that because, let's face it, no Marxist ever does, but can you at least state the situation properly?
Now, let's say this product essentially took 2 hours. The specific product took 2 hours to make, and that in its cost would basically cost in an estimates of $20. Now there's more, so it costs $20 for this to entirely happen.
Yeah, definitely never ran a business before. Not even sure you've worked a real job.
So what he can do is essentially fix up the price, or he can cut the entirety of the wage of the worker as well, and essentially not pay them, and not even pay them $20, but instead pay them $10 based on how much they're worth, based on like the labor time that they actually produced in, and thus essentially spending, but obviously this is under the assumption that this is even being paid onto the $40 entirely.
Thank you for explaining that so clearly.
And the fact that their entire employment cycle of the wage worker is essentially exploitive to the worker because it alienates them from their labor and essentially doesn't give them entirely of the actual money that essentially they actually put in within the time of this labor.
I'm sure that made sense in your head. To the rest of us, it sounds like you're saying they didn't get paid what their labor's worth. But the whole point is, who decides what their labor is worth? If they don't think their labor is worth that wage, they wouldn't take that job. And if they think their labor is worth $10 an hour, which is the number you seem to have been working with, although I can't really tell because none of that made the slightest amount of sense, but they can't find anyone to actually pay them $10 an hour, then in what sense is their labor worth that much?
We have to do the math here, but the subjective theory of value, under this assumption that this entirely of pricing is essentially subjective and doesn't actually really doesn't really actually do the math on or understanding onto like the or under kind of like does the math or essentially does any form of like essentially calculations mathematically for the entire of the wage or the price to essentially be determined.
It really sounds like you're insisting that human behavior should reduce to an equation. Sorry, it doesn't. There's the amount people are willing to sell their labor for and the amount employers are willing to pay them. As far as those two match, that's the wages people get paid.
It only essentially raises more questions on how the entirety of this economics structure is essentially established under capitalism. All you have done is essentially described onto the competition and the entire competition process and the entire mindset of the bourgeois without explaining onto how the bourgeois would pay his worker, would go entirely onto the market process, or even be able to sell the entirety of the cost.
What other answer could you possibly want?
This is the problem here with entire Austrian School of Economics and even classical economists and economic schools, even here in the United States, and not only that, but also most of Western Europe as well. This is the entirety of the problem. They would cling to this and say that this is entirely the case, without essentially doing the math onto how wages are determined.
We've already seen how little research you've put into this, so it should come as no surprise that you seem to have missed Hayek's pretense of knowledge. But you really should give it a read. It goes into this issue in great detail.
I guess what we can say onto this conclusion is that, at least what we can essentially say onto this conclusion is that,
I guess we can say you really like repeating yourself, and we can essentially say you really like repeating yourself.
Is that really, this entire subjective theory of value just doesn't really make any sense.
Well, the way you say it, it doesn't. Of course, the way you say anything doesn't make any sense.
But this is not the case under capitalism. We exchange things. We use a medium of exchange. We use money to essentially circulate it, and for things to be bought from, not based on the other needs of others, rather by exchange. This is so you can't say that this is subjective, because exchange does have a price. If it didn't, then there's no exchange in the first place. Period.
Yeah.
And it even fails to even explain on how the bourgeois, the boss, even gets money in the first place.
No, that's Marxism that fails to take that into account. We have this little thing called Say's Law, which you guys deny up and down a blue streak. And we constantly ask Marxists to consider the issue of how the means of production gets created to begin with. You guys just seem to assume that a factory is just there and a capitalist bourgeois is using it to exploit the workers. When the truth is, he came to be an owner by personal sacrifice. Either he had some money and decided not to get the benefit of it with things he could purchase, choosing instead to put it into the business, or he sacrificed part of his future by going into debt to investors whom he now has to pay back. So if you just forcefully take the factory from him, what of that personal sacrifice he's made? What of all the stuff he never gets to buy for himself so he can put it into the business? What of the debt he's still into the investors whom he still has to pay back somehow?
It makes it seem like the employer class is essentially a hard working class.
Because it is! Look at a CEO's job. Look at what the typical business owner does. If anything, they generally put in more work than any individual worker. And when you consider that against what they draw from the business, it often ends up being lower than what they earn by hour, often even below minimum wage. This is another question you brain-dead simps can't ever answer. Why does everyone who works for a company deserve to get paid except the owner?
Right, and like essentially products and all these things is essentially determined based on the labor time or the labor power that is essentially put into this.
Except from the owner.
And is only subjective or fixed up or fixed down once it reaches the market, not onto the entirety of the value itself. So because if there wasn't, then there would be no way for essentially things to be distributed like ethically or effectively under like in the entirety of the market system.
I'd love to respond to that. Unfortunately, I don't have the first idea what he just said.
And at least with the labor theory of value, it actually does the math.
Could you please show your work?
Yeah, I don't know. I'd urge you, and I urge myself, which I already do. I urge you and every other people to essentially understand the labor theory of value, that it does entirely apply here. Subjective theory of value only applies under the production of use value, which is not the case in capitalism, when its main essence is based on the value of exchange.
I couldn't have put it any better myself. Mostly because it was unintelligible gibberish. Hey, thanks for watching. Please hit like and subscribe and keep these videos coming by donating, becoming a subscriber and getting special benefits, or even for free with airtime. And check out all the great content here, like this video selected just for you.